public, the new facilities that we're building are being built by impact fees.
Yes.
And economize labor from departments in the county.
Yeah, you won't see the impact fees in the budget. You can comment, well, where is it?
That's my point. I just wanted that to be discussed. And so the facilities are not in this budget for that reason. They come from impact fees.
That question's come before me too, and I think people need to understand that the county, these are multi-use buildings that we have. The sheriff uses them, search and rescue uses them, our emergency management uses those. What's that? Ambulance uses them.
Public safety.
So they're a public safety building. Yes, the fire district uses them as well. So I guess it's a little bit of a misnomer just to call them fire stations, but yes, those emergency facilities.
I didn't clarify that. Thanks, Mike. They are being billed out of impact fee, which you won't see in the budget because that is set aside. You can't use that for operations maintenance.
You won't find that at the back of the county's financial statements. There's a schedule on the impact fees on what's collected and what's used, those impact fees. So they're specifically for emergency management.
I do understand what Kip's suggesting, and Steve and Mike, that we find some common ground. I hope we can.
Well, I think if we went at this and improve the budget and then work with plan each year, look at the budget and try to maintain the certified tax rate, growth is going to help cover that equipment shortage. If we can adjust the certified tax rate to take it in.
But we need to get back there.
That's where we failed. I don't think
We're way off of that though, right now. If we can get back there where the citizens voted on that to begin with, that makes sense to me too.
well, I think the citizen voted back in '89. We were talking a lot smaller population base and value base. So
what
yeah,
that's kept us from doing is capturing that growth, right? It's dropped down because of that.
Right.
So we
Well,
wouldn't
I
be
think we're
happy.
looking at a different scenario now. We're going to be facing new growth coming in. I mean, we're going to see values going up, like changing the certified tax rate to manage that certified tax rate would be capturing that. And for those older properties that don't change in value, there'll be no change in tax for them. But for the newer properties, as they appreciate the value, there'd be a higher tax. We got a certain percent of the population here in the county that having a hard time making it now. And being a senior citizen, after everything.
I think we all have representatives, Steve. And as I evaluate it, I mean, the proposed increase is actually less than what we collect for the Central Utah Water Project.
It is, but we don't have any direct control.
No, we don't, but as we look at it and compare, you know, the services, we're talking about health and safety, we're not talking about
Essential services.
I'm afraid if we wait longer, the interest is going to go up and equipment costs come up again. I've very mixed feelings about which way to go. I looked at it, I reread the comments that were about in the public hearing on both sides, and I agree with parts of both sides, and I disagree with parts of both sides. I'm supportive of the fire department and some of the things all of the things they do, and the great service they provide for the citizens of the county. I guess how much Mike and Steve have been putting in, we need to look at it, work towards it, get a plan to work forward, and try to do it. I think we need to get back to that certified tax rate estimate, work towards that.
I'll make my comments and then I guess I'm looking for a motion. You know, I don't take lightly any tax increase, certainly not even $22. The point of my job, people are looking me to do here, is to look at whether or not the budget and the operations that the fire district operates are reasonable and necessary for the citizens of Wasatch County. I have looked at the budget and the operations. scale of those operations. And I believe that the operations are not more than we need. The budget reflects the operations that we need for the Wasatch County to continue to operate at the level that we've been operating at. I have looked at each line. I have concerns on some lines. I don't agree with every line. I'd like to see more in training. I do have a problem with the amount of training, but again, that's more money. And I'd like to see our training up. The lawsuit is just something we have to deal with. I know there's some talk about the lawsuit, spending money on the lawsuit, but what that doesn't tell you is how much we've saved by fighting. Because the amount would have been, or at least most likely would have been much, much higher. And so, in my opinion, the money spent, and I've come into this, I was elected after those lawsuits were instigated. I wasn't here at the time when the actions were taken that initiated the lawsuits, or even when the lawsuits were first brought forward and the decisions were made to defend those. So that's before my time, and yet I've looked at those issues and have determined on my own that it was worth the fight, that it would save the taxpayers of Wasatch County money to fight those lawsuits. And the money that we have and the decisions that we've made to continue to appeal and to fight those lawsuits, I still stand by my decisions there. And I believe it's ultimately saved the citizens of Wasatch County money in potential settlements that we would have otherwise had. The equipment, there's a lot of talk about the equipment. We're just now getting on the adding up the equipment. Chief and his firemen have done a lot of good work on identifying the most critical equipment that needs to be replaced. And they've identified about $4 to $4.5 million worth of equipment that's most critical, that's the oldest equipment. The reality is, in an equipment replacement plan, an ERP they usually call it, you have to identify all the equipment and then identify reasonable schedules of when you have to replace that equipment. And that equipment, if you do just simple math, even without inflationary factors involved, we're already over $6 million, and we haven't even completed adding all the equipment. At $300,000 a year, even if you believe there's not going to be any inflation, it takes 20 years to fully replace all the equipment. That's a 20-year replacement cycle on average for our equipment. That's too old. Most fire departments replace their equipment, depending on the type of equipment it is, on a much lower basis. Now, that doesn't mean Wasatch County has to follow that suit, but certainly there is a reasonableness. And I don't think 20 years, in my opinion, is reasonable for the protection of the people of Wasatch County. So $300,000, in my opinion, is just scratching the surface. Now, there are other ways. We could get some grants, and hopefully we can. If we can, then we don't have to raise taxes again. I hope that's the case. We can borrow money, but when you borrow money, you got to pay the principal plus the interest. So the $300,000 I just went through in an exercise, that only covers the principal in theory. If you borrow the money, you got to pay principal and the interest, and that worsens the problem. It only allows us to borrow. That replacement cycle gets even longer. So I have looked at the budget, and I do feel the budget is warranted. It's justified for the protection of the people of Wasatch County, which is what I was elected to do. On the question of whether to put this to a vote of people, number one, putting on the 14 ballot would then put it on 15 taxes, assuming that it passed. We need the money in Wasatch County's fire district to continue operating before then. So I don't think that's the case. Plus, the citizens in the Beaver North District, I believe, elected me to represent them here. Fire and EMS and other services we provide are essential services. I don't think they elected me to turn back to them to ask them to vote on every issue that comes before us. And I don't think $22 a year is something that most of my constituents would disagree that they've sent me here to make a decision on. So I continue to support the budget that's been presented, and it's my feeling that it is a justified and warranted budget. This argument about not being transparent, the budget is out there. It's not a summarized budget. It's right down to the general ledger detail. So it's not a summary of our chart of accounts. It's not a summary of our financial statements. It's right down to the detail of the chart of accounts. It's not a complex budget. It's out there for the public to see. we've given sufficient detail about what makes up the largest portion of that budget. And the others are just based on estimates based on prior year's knowledge of the chief operating the fire district. So the salaries and wages tie directly. We've given exactly to the dollar where the salaries and wages are going. The retirement plan, the first 6 months are locked in. We know the retirement rate contribution for the first 6 months. That's a given to us. That rate's given to us by Utah Retirement Systems. The next 6 months, from July to December, we've estimated to be somewhat similar, and most likely it will, or even maybe somewhat higher. But we've estimated that next 6 months. Payroll taxes are what they are. Include FICA, Medicare, we know what those are. That's built into that budget. Those are payroll-related items. So the bulk of the budget, being payroll-related or personnel-related, and the rest of it being equipment-related is the nature of the fire department, equipment and manpower. So again, I support the budget that's been presented. Turn it back to you. I look for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion that we adopt the budget for the Fire District 2014 as presented, which would include the tax increase as presented.
We have a motion by Chairman McPhee.
I'll second.
We have a second. Motion and second. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, I'll call for a roll call vote on this, and I'll start with myself. Yes.
No.
I'm going to vote no because I think we can accomplish the same thing with the small communities.
Yes.
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 No. Okay, we have 4-3, so the motion passes. Budget has been set. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn the time back to you.
Okay, let's see, we have a motion to do the fire district. Oh, I have a public
Public
hearing.
hearing, and this was a public hearing.
Okay, we're back in regular session, and the next item is a